in them is embarrassed to ask for that kind of, that it's one thing to imagine violence if there was not violence in the home.
Yeah.
It's another, but if you began by making movies at home, there's a movie coming out tomorrow, is it Super 8, which is about kids who made movies when they were 12 and 13, which is what Steven Spielberg did, and J.J. Abrams and Marty maybe a little later. But he was
actually
storyboarding
making
them.
little movies. Yeah, the whole point about Marty was before he was actually with a camera and stuff, he was drawing these little movies. They were like moving little storyboards. You would pull them through a little theater he had in his bedroom, and it would look like a movie. And to this day, I mean, that's how Marty makes a movie. I mean, he draws out everything. To this minute. I mean, he's making his little sketches, and there is a kind of manic meticulousness to that way of proceeding to start a movie.
Well, he has to be Marty.
Yeah. Well,
we didn't even get up to Taxi Driver, but I will ask you where you think the last decade of his work is, the level of the last decade of his work is in comparison to the 70s or 80s?
Yeah, I think the movies, there was inherent in the movies Marty was making, at the Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, and other movies of that time that are sort of less. I mean, I'm a big fan, for example, of King of Comedy. I mean, it's one of the itchiest movies I've ever seen. I've never, running it at home, I have never been able to run it straight through. I kind of get to one of those scenes like when he's trying to get in to see Jerry Lewis, and I say, I think I'll go get a cup of coffee now.
That does have a high discomfort level, that film.
It's about as high as I think Marty gets, and I'm not neglecting, the extraordinary violence and so forth of the other films. I think there's more of a sense of self-discovery in the earlier films, a sense of almost, I could do this. I can imagine this scene and stage this scene, and it's going to get in the movie. And I don't see that thing so much in more recent films. I mean, I'm not saying he's tired and repeating himself or any of those things, but I think there is, with people who take any art seriously, there is the moment where they are taking inordinate pleasure in their own skills and their own sense of discovery of pushing whatever their personal envelope is to some new place. And I think that's not present in Marty's more recent films pretty much. That doesn't mean they're not entertaining or worth attending or all of that stuff. But yeah, I think he reached a kind of peak there.
Could you encapsulate it into De Niro, DiCaprio?
What do you mean by that?
I mean that is
you mean the difference
the
between
wildness and the wildness of De Niro, the raging the taxi driver, Goodfellow, and the maybe subterranean churning but surface placidity of the smoothness. What is DiCaprio? The anti-De Niro.
Well, he sort of is, isn't he?
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
This is not to put one over the other, just to say it's an interesting choice of someone to star in 4 of your last 5 movies or whatever he's done.
That's true. It may be that Leo DiCaprio has still untapped depths in those ways. I mean, he's doing this picture with Eastwood about J. Edgar Hoover. Mm-hmm. And I've read that script, as it happens. It's a brilliant script. And I have a feeling that it may call upon some things in DiCaprio that he has not had called upon in the past.
Well, you don't think he tapped depths from his teen years in Gilbert Grape and
I'll be honest,
Basketball Diaries and so forth? He was always a character actor who was because of Titanic was mislabeled a star.
Well, that's
and it's great for Marty that he can bring many people to see Shutter Island. But
this is not being cynical or anything, but DiCaprio is somebody who can get a movie made. And I'm not sure that it's any longer the case that Bob De Niro can get a movie made, certainly a kind of movie that's going to challenge people and all that sort of thing. But, those are things I don't actually know about. I don't know what goes into putting those packages together. But I do think you should have written this book. I mean, you have a more broad-gauged view of it, I think, than I do. I mean, it is a problem when you do a book like this. You kind of get into somebody else's self-definitions, and you sometimes forget to ask the obvious cultural questions. This isn't to say you shouldn't buy the book. I mean, because there's lots of good stuff in it.
You should buy the book.
Yeah, right. But anyway, do you guys want to do some questions? Yeah?
Can I ask you about something you had in another book?
I guess so.
Well,
Especially if Corliss read it.
You make the shocking assertion in your book, the Disney version, about Walt Disney, was that when Walt Disney was a boy or a youth in Kansas City, he was subject to what only called a semi-homosexual assault.
He was what?
He was subject to what only can be, he suffered what can only be called a semi-homosexual assault.
I don't think I ever said that.
I don't remember that.
No. I don't think so.
I don't remember that, and
Okay, never mind.
Okay. Fine. Next.
I don't think you said it, and I memorized that book.
Yeah.
Besides his bankability, what is it about DiCaprio that you think Scorsese? Besides his bankability, what is it about DiCaprio that you think Scorsese is drawn to as a collaborator?
It's really a different type of movie that he actually makes with DiCaprio. I mean, I wonder, culturally, historically, the kind of movies that, I'm thinking particularly of Raging Bull and that sort of. I wonder if anybody could make that movie today. I mean, there's something raw about that Taxi Driver, the psychotic aspects of both those characters that, I think they're kind of beyond Leo DiCaprio's range. I mean, we have to go somewhere else if we're talking about in a slightly different set of subject matter and so forth. Yeah. So much about movies. Look, typically, Marty at any given moment has 4 or 5 projects in work. It's a script, or he's beginning a script, or he's starting to revise a script. Meantime, some other picture is moving along toward whatever fate it's going to have with him. And there does come a moment, even for Marty, where you have to go into the studio and say, well, I want to do this. And sometimes you can't do that. I mean, they say, yeah, but we'd like something with Leo DiCaprio in it, And then he might have something that's sort of backburnered, and he can push that through. I mean...
do you have the impression that he feels himself in any way forced to use DiCaprio? I think he thinks of himself not simpatico as his...
There's a good relationship between them, and that is important to him. Also, I mean, I have to say, let's take an example, The Aviator. I like half, 2/3 of that movie quite a bit. I think he's getting at some interesting stuff in terms of American entrepreneurship and the craziness that it can draw out of people like Howard Hughes. And I think DiCaprio's terrific in that movie. And, it has its problems as it kind of develops, but there's something so soaring and beautiful about that film that I'm sort of really glad that they said, yeah, we'll be fine in that part, So I think one thing that is important, I mean, he says somewhere in the book, rather plaintively, because we've been discussing his crime movies, and he said, couldn't we talk about the other ones? What about Kundun? What about King of Comedy? Well, it's perfectly true. I mean, there is this inherent desire of people to pigeonhole people. And I really feel that to some degree he feels that way because he has made other kinds of movies, you know. It's just that, you know, maybe a movie like Goodfellas is just so much more vivid in certain simple ways that we tend to say, well, yeah, but he doesn't. I mean, if you were to look at his filmography, I haven't actually counted up, but, you know, there's plenty of movies that aren't about gangsters. They aren't about, you know, so I don't know. I was thinking about this movie he's been trying to make for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. You know, it's about a couple of Jesuit priests in Japan, who naturally, and it's about their struggles with faith and their struggles with the Japanese who think that, you know, these crazy white guys, what are they doing? I mean, we're fine. We don't need to be converted to their religion and so forth. I guess, as I understand it, that ends up, you know, pretty tragically. But it's a movie that he's obsessed about.
Is this from a book?
It is from
in a novel?
Yeah, yeah.
Who did he have write it?
I believe Jay Cox wrote it with him. And he can't get it on. I mean, and it's not an expensive movie. I mean, it's, you know. And it is one thing you would think at a certain point. He is, after all, Marty. He's made a lot of really good movies. Basically, he doesn't lose studios a lot of money. Occasionally, he makes money for them. So, you know, why don't they just say, oh, okay, can you do it for 20 million or 25? You can go ahead, you know, because you could be surprised. And, but it hasn't happened.
Because they won't say do it for 25. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well, they would, maybe. But, you know, then he's way over there in Japan. You know, what's going to happen? I mean, that's a problem, you know. They like to be in control.
Maybe you could produce it and Clinch could shoot it, having done a Japanese movie.
They're right. Yeah. They're big in Japan, too.
Do you think someone coming up today,
Yeah.
and they're, you know, a lot of smart young filmmakers, do you think they can shape, reshape, extend the vocabulary the way Marty Scorsese, among other people, did 40 years ago?
I don't know.
Or even aspired to it? Now that we have, there's this huge mainstream walrus, and then there's the indie film, which are films which are essentially TV movies, bless them.
Yeah.
And I mean, if this isn't the tamest, most timid decade for any kind of cinematic, decade, the last 10 years of improvisation, I can't imagine what decade you'd want to come up with.
I don't know. I mean, I guess somebody is out there, you know, in film school or making his first little TV movies or whatever he's doing. And, you know, he may have, you know, some unique perspective. You know, actually what Marty brought to, you know, his early pictures of criminal life, of all that was pretty unique. I mean, there wasn't anybody else actually tackling it from those directions. So, yeah, I think the potential is there. I think what you're saying is, are the screens thinner? That is to say, the screen that is preventing you from making. Are they saying, well, gee, we just really can't do that?
I'll put it this way: if you started in the '70s or the late '60s, like Marty, but I'm thinking of David Lynch, right? Yeah. From Eraserhead through Mulholland Drive and his self-distributed, not very well distributed, Inland Empire, he still will make the Lynchiest movies around. Yeah. Whereas a filmmaker like Darren Aronofsky, who began with Pi and Requiem for a Dream, is making movies that, you know, Pache the Wrestler or that anyone else could make and take the name off, and it might be hard to distinguish.
I agree with
I mean,